And action. Hello and welcome to Walk the Talk Show with Waylon Lewis, yours truly. And today I'm honored to be here with Christopher Smith, who is a longtime friend who happens to be now, well, what's the big news? What's the big development in your life, Christopher?
Well, the big development is that I threw my name into the hat. I'm basically running for Congress in California's 25th district, which is most of you will probably know is the district that Katie Hill formerly represented. And when she resigned a couple of weeks ago, there was a bit of a mad dash for people to jump in. So I don't know why, but I thought it was the time, and I did.
So yeah, I mean, let's start with a bow. We do that in the Buddhist tradition. I know you go back with Buddhism a little bit. So let's take a good posture. Everyone watching, you can join in. Take the best posture your whole day. Take a good breath, and with respect to all the issues Christopher cares about and we'll talk about, let's give it away. So yeah, I kind of want to dig in there a little bit. So, what possibly possesses you to not just have the thought to jump in, which makes sense. You're been involved with New Era Colorado. That's kind of how we met. You've been involved in politics and in social action for, decades, but to actually do it, which seems like a lot of work and risk and hard and intimidating. What really inspired you to actually do it?
Well, I think I like you said, I had some past experiences working in politics, working on campaigns, working for my congressman at the time briefly, and who's now actually the governor of Colorado. Shout out to Jared Polis. You're doing a great job. I've always thought that the best way to make change, there's several ways, but one of the best ways is to actually do it within the systems and institutions that we have. And I think I've been recently, the last 8 years, working in documentary film, and I kind of got away from the more politics and community organizing aspect of, sort of my mission. And I kind of felt like I wasn't being active enough, directly active enough. Documentary films are so important in changing the narrative around issues, but I wanted to, get my hands dirty, kind of like in not in the ethical sense, but in the, in the sense that I wanted to get out there and fight and be more active. And so when the opportunity came up, I think I had what I thought was a brief time to think about it. And I kind of asked a few people, but eventually just kind of trusted my gut. I think it's part of my personality is to jump in and first and ask questions later. And I try to be a little bit more I be responsibly so, but I guess what I'm saying is sometimes acting is more important than waiting and analyzing, because eventually you get analysis paralysis, or you end up not doing anything. So
right. No, I really admire that. I think most of us in our life think about our dreams or things we want to do or how we want to serve the greater good or the specific local good. But a lot of us just think about it. I know I see problems in my hometown every day. You see homeless encampments and you say, oh, shoot, I should really do something about that. And hopefully I have done small things about it in my life, but we don't jump. And I think there's a real power to jumping in. So on a practical level, how the hell do you run for Congress? How do you must do some paperwork. You have to
Yeah, actually. So it's turns out it's pretty hard, which, I think that most people would assume that anyways, but there are a lot of things that are difficult that you don't necessarily anticipate. And for me, I actually did my master's in public administration at the University of Colorado in Denver. And so that basically is literally studying the bureaucracy. And even with that background, I found it particularly hard to navigate the process of just getting your name on the ballot, knowing who to register with in terms of financial oversight. In the case of Congress, you register with the FEC. And then actually opening a bank account was one of the most difficult things, because a lot of banks don't understand what to do with a congressional campaign, because it's not really a business, and it's not really governed by the state. It's at a federal level, but so there's just all these things that you don't anticipate.
And you're doing it all yourself, or mostly yourself?
I am.
Yeah.
I'm more privileged and more fortunate than most of the people in the country to both, be educated, but also have the kind of job that I have the flexibility to take on the time it takes to do these things and figure it out. And even still, it was a really difficult process. And so I can only imagine how hard it would be for, somebody who's like a single mother, school teacher, somebody who comes from a less privileged background. It's just a very bureaucratic process. And I think part of that is just because there's not enough, there's only probably 1,000 some odd congressional races, campaigns in a year out of millions of people. So, there's not a lot of people out there putting out information and training people and telling people how to do this. There are some resources, but it's not that nuanced, and the rules and the laws change depending on what state you're in. So
so that's the power. You and I briefly touched on this when I called you after I heard you were running, but that's the power of these kind of grassroots organizations that say recruited Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or others. These organizations do, I would assume, have a lot of resources for how the hell to open a bank account in New York or whatever it is, and doing it on your own must be just
it's tricky.
Tricky.
I did reach out to Justice Democrats actually, but then they were like, "Oh, I'm sorry, we're not able to help, but we're with you in solidarity." But then 2 days later, Cenk Uygur announced his candidacy for actually the same race, and he's one of the founders of Justice Democrats. So I have no idea if that played into their decision, but that's just like at the end of the day, if you don't have them on your side or they're on someone else's side, it's really even more difficult.
Right. Yeah, seems tough. So how is your spirits in this? Are you enjoying the whole adventure and all the difficulty, or is it just like intimidating and frustrating, or what does it feel like day to day?
Well, it's an emotional ride. I think, like any sort of big undertaking is, particularly when you're being forced to grow and stretch yourself in ways that you aren't used to. So there are some like highs, some victories, meeting people, convincing somebody who initially was maybe hostile to, not really hostile, but resistant to you as a candidate. And then, later on they sign your petition to, like those kinds of things, like feel really good. And then there are extreme lows when you're, I have been doing this mostly alone. I have one of my oldest friends actually is working on as my campaign manager at the time, but he doesn't have any experience in politics. And even though he's doing an amazing job, it's just, there's a lot of decisions I have to make alone. There's a lot of moments when there's not someone there to like talk me off a ledge. And, so the reality is it actually is quite a stressful thing for somebody who's never undertaken it before. And at this particular, level of government, it's also, there's a lot of attention. I'm at the beginning, so I probably haven't even felt a lot of that yet, but all the mistakes you make are on a bigger stage and are out there for everybody to see. And you constantly have people judging you because that's what you're doing, is getting people to judge you, so
can't even blame them.
Exactly. Yeah.
You're like, here, judge me. What do you think?
Yeah. And, hopefully people see the authenticity of what I'm trying to do and that I mean well, and I'm trying to make the world a better place. Yeah. And at the very least, respect that, even if they don't agree with my positions. But, there are plenty of people out there in the way that politics has become, in the discourse in our society, that there are going to be plenty of people who are just going to hate me probably. And that's true for any candidate on any side of the political spectrum. And they don't know you, and yet they're going to be talking about you. And luckily, I'm not that far along yet, so I haven't experienced a great deal of that. And actually, the worst of it has actually come from other Democrats. So,
wow. Well, right. I mean, I would assume you're competing against fellow Democrats right now. You're not, right? You're not in the general election. So I'm sure, like any human community, there's a lot of, you got to keep your friends close.
Well, it's a very high stakes game.
Yeah.
I mean, not just people's potential jobs, or some people really care about that, or the notoriety or whatever, but it's also these issues that are life and death, and people have a lot tied up in them, and also their identity and things like that. So it's understandable.
Yeah.
Here in California, we have what's called a jungle primary. So actually, all of the candidates, both Republican and Democrat, it doesn't matter what party you are, the top two finishers will go on to the runoff. So
Right.
really, I am in a race against everybody.
Oh, wow.
However, we're kind of the Democrats are kind of competing for a certain slice of the pie, which is the base.
Sure.
And so, yeah, it's still kind of party politics, but like it is a jungle primary.
Right. Yeah. I should have remembered that from like, I think the governor races like 10 years ago or something.
Yeah.
Where everybody, like a stripper was running, and some web entrepreneur was running, and Arnold Schwarzenegger jumped in. It was just a madhouse, literally a jungle. So yeah, I want to encourage anyone watching on Facebook, and this will be on Instagram later and YouTube, all that. Ask questions and we'll get back. Do we have one now?
We have one question.
Okay. It better be good, because I have lots of questions myself.
It's from Ryan Van Duzer.
Oh, Ryan Van Duzer. Yeah.
Love that guy.
So he's
dear friend of ours.
Yes. He says, Christopher, you're one of the nicest guys I know. How will you deal with the mean side of campaigning? Great
question. So how, what, like, we want to encourage good people to run and jump in, but it's a kind of intense, scary, vicious world sometimes. Mm-hmm. How do you maintain your integrity and your kindness?
It's a great question. I guess we'll find out. But I think at the end of the day, I am a long shot candidate. I'm not going to, deny that, or I think there's like this idea that you have to be overly confident and project that you're going to win all the time in politics, and will it into existence. And, I'm going to fight like hell for it. But at the same time, the reality is, at the end of the day, I'm still going to have to live with myself. And I don't want to change who I am and the values I represent for a race that, that essentially I'm a long shot candidate. And even if I wasn't, I wouldn't want to, because, I think that we need to think a little bit more reflexively in our politics and in our campaigns, and actually reflect the world that we want to see while we're going about doing that. Because if we can't do that in our campaigns, how are we going to do that in government?
Beautifully said. I think that's a pull-out quote right there. Mm-hmm. So let's get specific. Why on earth are you running? So what are some of the issues you care about? I'm going to guess climate change might be important, social equality, but can you get into some of the issues you're passionate about?
Yeah, definitely. And, this is always tough, particularly at a congressional level, because there are so many important issues. Right. It's really hard to single out 3 or 4 that, this needs to be taken care of as a priority, or this is something I particularly care about, because I care about all of them. Having said that, you also can't deny what's going on in the country at the moment. And so to that end, I think economic inequality is right there at the top, as is, getting Medicare, or Medicare for all is my particular position, but making sure everybody gets covered with quality healthcare is also top of the list. And those issues, along with several other, are so tied together. Yeah. Because, the leading cause of bankruptcy is people who have a medical emergency and can't afford to pay their medical bills. So you can't really look at one without the other. Some other issues that I think I'm particularly passionate about, obviously, is going to be climate change, and also animal welfare, which I don't think enough people talk about in campaigns. It's, they are the most exploited individuals or organisms really in the world, like all these animals and the way that we treat them. And yet we never talk about that. We never talk about the justice as it comes to non-human.
Right. Yeah. We never talk about it. I talk about it all the time, but nobody listens. But so why are you, what would you like to do in terms of animal welfare? What made you passionate about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, so I'm what I like to call a non-annoying vegan. So I'm vegan, as is my partner, and we're vegan for a number of reasons. Well, I'll talk about myself. I'm vegan for a number of reasons, and a lot of it has to do with sustainability and health and well-being and vitality. But also I really care about how we treat and raise the animals that we consume, and particularly, and also like what, in fashion and the beauty industry. And actually I'm working on a film about veganism in the beauty and fashion industry and how it's going more cruelty-free and vegan. That's a side topic. But going through that process has opened my eyes a lot to this exploitation that's happening and how we just kind of dismiss it a lot of times. And, I think that people have a certain view of animal rights people. And I wouldn't put myself in the extreme camp of animal rights, but I do think there's a number of policies that we can look at that are common sense that we can reduce the suffering of animals at the very least, and at the federal level, it's going to be a little different than the laws and regulations you might look to in the state level. But at the federal level, I think we can look at, there's a number of laws passed against, criminalizing people who try to reveal malpractice in the basically at butchers and feeding lots and things like that. And, ag gag laws, as we call them. So we can look at trying to do something about that, maybe even having a whistleblower protection when it comes to the abuse of animals. And, I think we can look at testing animals in cosmetics and passing a national law against using or selling products that have been tested on animals, like they have it in the EU. There are a number of things, really, and I feel like we can examine out of the box options. But keeping in mind that at the federal level, there are certain aspects that we can look at, but there are others that are best left up to the states.
Awesome. Well, so I think you got your vegan base of voters.
Yeah. Actually, I was in our district. There's actually a very large amount of animal rescues. Per capita. There's dozens of them. And I went to one last week and actually talked to them about what they would like to see at the federal level. And they rescue exotic animals from the pet trade. So a lot of monkeys and birds and armadillos and things like that.
Right.
And so that's another thing we can look at is smuggling wildlife into the country. And also, like what do we do for people who have these animals then can't take care of them anymore? There are actually certain protections that we could give them so that they can, give them up for adoption without fearing being prosecuted in states where that's illegal.
So what's your website?
My website is Christopher Smith for Congress.
Yeah. I have it up on my tabs right now. One of only 200 tabs I have open.
Me too.
So Christopher Smith for Congress. What is it?
ChristopherSmithforCongress.com.
Yeah. And if we go there, we can see in more depth all of the issues you're passionate about.
Yeah. And that site's a work in progress. Right now, I'm just sort of like building the airplane on my way off the cliff,
Sure.
So I'll be adding some more issues and I want to make videos for all of the issues slowly over time, and I'll release them on my social media, but also on the pages for those issues.
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't be too self-deprecating there. It's a fine website. I was quite impressed. I'm quite impressed with the whole thing. As you know, when I first heard, I got super inspired and, called you up and texted you 80 times and supported you. And
if you don't know Waylon personally, he's very supportive and genuine and kind to his friends. And you've been supporting my projects for years now, from my first documentary, Tiny, all the way up to now. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, well, it's all, it's not out of the goodness of my heart. It's honestly like the goodness of what you're doing. I mean, if you look at Tiny, which we have covered on Elephant in the past, but we should mention that your Tiny film with Moret, our former editor,
who's amazing, talented filmmaker.
Tiny was huge. It was on the cover of Netflix and award winner right at South by Southwest. And
it didn't win an award at South by Southwest, but it premiered there.
Well, it got an award in my mind in South by Southwest.
Yeah, it did win an award, but not there.
Yeah, it's in the era of fake news. That's enough. And it helped, kind of galvanize and continue to launch this tiny house movement. I really give you guys a lot of that credit. There's many individuals who have helped do that, but it was a really great film. I encourage people to check it out. And you've been involved in a bunch of other great projects. So how do we help you go from like a dark horse candidate to like, I could have been I want to be an actual contender. How do we make you a real contender? How do we support you?
Well, for those who live in Northern LA County or Eastern Ventura County, in District 25, obviously you can vote. If you live in the greater Los Angeles area, I would love volunteers and any kind of way that you think you could help in person, or donations, contributions through the website for people around the country. I'm so far behind in terms of the fundraising race because my main two competitors on the Democratic side are both relatively well-heeled, you might say. And I'm truly running a grassroots campaign. I'm not taking money from PACs or oil and gas companies or any kind of ethically questionable entities or people. And also, because it's my first campaign, my first time running as a citizen, I don't have that establishment Democratic support. I think all of that's probably going to go to my opponent, who quite coincidentally, her name is Christy Smith, and I'm Christopher Smith, so that always gets a good laugh out of people. But she has a lot of the Democratic support. She's a lot more centrist, doesn't support a lot of these more progressive policies like Medicare for All and the Green New Deal. So I'm up against that. I'm up against the Democratic machine, and I don't have the resources that they have or the support that they give their candidates. So my other big competitor who is progressive is Cenk Uygur, but he has his media empire of the Young Turks and was able to raise $100,000 in the first 3 hours. And he announced a few weeks after I did, and I have not raised $100,000 yet. So maybe with your guys' help, we can get there. This is my pitch to please, if you support progressive candidates, grassroots candidates, and you want to see this kind of change in the world, and you want to see that kind of change brought to Washington, please go to my website, join the mailing list, and contribute whatever you feel is appropriate or whatever you can.
And even if it's like $5 or something, it's a morale boost, it's grassroots, it's democracy in action. Like literally $5 is totally helpful, right?
It is. And just to give you an idea, to print the 250-word candidate statement in the ballot, in the sample ballot that they send out to all voters, which is a really important thing to do, that alone is $6,800. It's $2,000 to enter one of the races in terms of a filing fee. And I had to run in 2 races at the same time because of one's a special election and one's for the general next time. And we're going to be on the ballot twice. So a lot of these expenses are doubled. And and just to compete, at even I want to run a strong ground game and get out and talk to as many people as I can. And that's going to require field directors, volunteers, campaign managers, finance directors, all of these things to compete at a real campaign for a congressional office. We just need the funding to get there. So at the moment, I really need to build that base of support in terms of contributions to, hire the right staff and take it to the next level where we can really reach out to some of the bigger donors but I really do want to focus on grassroots donors and the small donations. But, it's going to take a lot to compete against the Democratic Party and the Young Turks. So hopefully you guys can support me.
Well, I'm always super supportive. I think most of us are sort of the Bernie Sanders, like Elizabeth Warren school of candidacy, where you support grassroots candidates who maybe don't have the support of a huge organization that, they can do everything for that gentleman. They can raise $100,000 in 3 hours. I mean, that's crazy. Or, the establishment, and nothing's wrong with either, right? But, the notion that we're a democracy is a precious one, particularly now.
Well, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but, I think that one thing we have to realize is that change in Washington also comes from changing our parties. And right now, the Democratic Party is going through a bit of a shift, thanks in large part to people like Bernie Sanders, AOC, the Squad, Elizabeth Warren. And the problem is the change isn't happening fast enough, particularly at the state level, like the California Party. It's a real machine, and it's a lot harder to break into than, say Colorado, where I worked in politics before. It's a lot easier for an average person to break onto the scene in Colorado and have a real chance. But here in California, there's a lot more machine and a lot more entrenched interests that you have to work against. And we saw that it's possible through, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's campaign. And that's the kind of campaign I'm really trying to run.
Yeah.
One where it is about connecting with voters and going door to door. And, really talking about the issues and being authentic and not being afraid to stand up for values that we need for the next century, not the values from the last century. And the people in the Democratic Party who have been there a long time are great people, and they want to make the world a different place. They're just not embracing that change fast enough, and they're behind electorate in a lot of ways. So
yeah. So again, what areas of LA? Like, how do you know if you're in your district? If you're watching this or listening to this,
there are pretty much 3 or 4 main cities in my district, which is Santa Clarita is the main one, and that's we have about 200,000 people in Santa Clarita. Simi Valley has about 170, and then there is Palmdale and Lancaster, and actually only half of Lancaster is in the district. So that's pretty much it. There's a lot of rural townships and people who live kind of out in the country, but those are the main population centers. And also it's the Reagan Library is in Simi Valley, and it's a fairly conservative area. So there's that as well. It's actually, I think, was ranked probably like the 8th most conservative city in the country. So
wow.
Yeah, it's a swing district, and anybody who kind of followed Katie Hill's race, it was one of the ones that flipped in the blue wave, and it's been held by the GOP for like 20 or 30 years before that. So it is considered very moderate, and I think there's definitely truth to that. But I also kind of think that people respond to authenticity, and they respond to, people who really stand behind policies and ideals. And I think that a lot of these ideas on the progressive platform appeal to across the spectrum, because they really are about returning the power to the people and giving, not really giving, but like making sure that the economy works for everybody and that everybody has the coverage and the support that they need to thrive. Because right now we see all of that support going to corporations and wealthy people, and very little of it going to, middle class and poorer people in the country. And we need to, swap that, you switch that. And I think even a lot of conservatives recognize that, and a lot of Democrats recognize that. So really that's my message, is that you need an authentic leader to bring these ideas to Washington. Also somebody who's going to listen and try to learn before acting, but somebody who's going to advocate for policies that really are going to make a difference.
Yeah. I think generally Republicans, want to keep government off people's backs, and generally liberals, Democrats want to keep corporations off of people's backs. On some level, you just want the powers that be off of your back so that you work hard, you're a decent human being, you can have your middle class, you can fall in love, you can have a family if you wish to, you can live your life however you like.
Mm-hmm. And I'm very sympathetic to nobody wants government in life. I mean, if you look at the authoritarian regimes around the world, like that's a very good example of why you don't want too much government. However, the flip side of that is when you totally deregulate things, what we see is that the people who benefit from that are the people who have, specific knowledge or resources to take advantage of that. And the losers are often, well, most of us, to be perfectly honest. And so there has to be a middle ground. The population is growing, and with that competition for resources and, there's a lot more potential for people to do harm, either intentionally or not, to other people. And so we need to recognize that government is going to increasingly be something that we need to turn to make sure that people are taken care of, and other people and other corporations and organizations aren't taking advantage of things. So.
Amen. Yeah. And you often, when there is an authoritarian kind of corrupt regime, I think New York Times just did a huge article on this. There's huge giveaways to the friends of the regime, these big corporations, the 1%, and, the little guy or the little lady doesn't really have a chance. The people who play by the rules don't have a chance.
Yeah. When you look at the Trump tax cuts from 2 years ago, most of that went to corporations and the wealthy. And what we see is the deficit spiraling out of control, which, ostensibly the GOP argues against, but who got the benefits of that? Primarily, it was Amazon and Netflix who paid $0 in taxes. Like, you pay more in your monthly Netflix subscription than they pay in taxes every year. That's something to think about. Yeah. And, meanwhile, many people can't afford healthcare, and we can't we don't have jobs or we're underemployed, and it's getting increasingly harder to afford rent, mortgages. People like to pick on millennials for living at home, but who can afford to buy a house these days in most places? I mean, no one. We're saddled with debt from higher education. I personally have more than $100,000 in debt from my master's and my undergrad, and I went to a state school for both. So, it's becoming increasingly more expensive to be poor and increasingly cheaper to be wealthy. And we need to do something about that.
Yeah, we had one of the world's great middle classes of like all time. I think up until like that started changing around 1980, thanks to the president of your local political library.
Right.
Yeah,
no, you're absolutely right. And when we had the highest marginal tax rate in history, which I believe was under FDR, that was the time when people were really thriving. And a lot of the baby boomers, that are out there, okay, boomer, they have been they've benefited from that, but then systematically dismantled that system that they benefited from. And that's not to attack anybody, but it's just to recognize that our generation and the following generation aren't benefiting from the same things that the boomers did, benefited from, and that we're not asking for anything crazy. We're just asking to go back to that time.
Yeah.
And not looking backwards, but looking forwards. Like, how are we going to create those kind of benefits, but for the new energy economy, the new technology economy that we're going to have in this coming century, recognizing the problems that are coming down the pipeline in the next century as well.
Yeah. There's a real sense of hopelessness or kind of like giving up. Like in the face of corruption, we can't even begin to handle challenges like climate change or a fair economy. But we have to like return some hope there and have some decent human beings like yourself jump into the mud.
Well, with those, with those problems or those issues, there comes great opportunity. There's always a silver lining, or you never know what kind of benefits come from trying to address them head on. And I think climate change is a really good example of that, and the Green New Deal, where we can actually restructure our economy and at the same time fight climate change and other environmental issues. And we need to look at solutions like that.
Yeah. And we'll have to on some level if we want to respond to floods and, smoky air and all the challenges, drought that comes with climate change. We'll have to respond, right?
Right. And they're all interconnected. And so we need to find those solutions that are intersectional or interdisciplinary. And right now, we don't do that nearly enough in government. We don't listen to our experts. We don't get experts from different fields together to talk about solutions as much as we should. And I'm not even talking about biology and chemistry. I'm talking about, we need to bring in, as corny as this sounds, I think we need to bring in spiritual advisors and artists and look to different philosophies. Because if we approach everything through the same lens that we've been approaching problems through in the past, we're not going to make the changes and make the difference that we need to going forward.
Amen. Well, Christopher, very inspired. It's our job to, be there for you and help keep you inspired as you go forward. So anyone who watches this and is inspired, wants to support kind of progressive democracy from the ground up, go give $5 or volunteer or
$100. We take $100.
Yeah. The legal maximum of 2,800, whatever it is.
Yeah. And I invite everyone watching around the world to slide into my DMs. You can find us at Instagram at Christopher Smith 2020. Okay. And we have a Facebook page, Christopher Smith for Congress, also a website, ChristopherSmithForCongress.com.
All right. Awesome. Well, Christopher, thank you for your time. Thank you for running.
Thanks, Waylon. Again, I really appreciate you as a human being.
Oh, likewise. Yeah. Super inspiring, man. And just let us know in Elephant what we can do.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. And thanks for everybody out there watching. And regardless of who you vote for, go vote.
Amen. Go vote. Any more? We're good. All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Go team.